Meow, welcome to the PodKat. My name is Kat. This is my pod. I keep introducing it backwards. Oh well, okay. So it's April 22nd, and today we have an international guest. Hello.
Hello.
Would you like to tell us who you are and where you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Holly Garrett. I'm an old friend of Kat's from high school, and I'm currently living in San Jose, Costa Rica, working as an ornithologist, so a bird scientist.
Ooh, you said you're in San Jose, Costa Rica?
Yes, Costa Rica.
So you're working with birds there. So I am really excited to talk to you because I love you and you're interesting. And also, I would love to get an international perspective. So what has been Costa Rica's response to the pandemic and how has it affected you?
Yeah, good question. So Costa Rica's response has been, so they closed the borders of the country on March 18th. And since then, there were people, non-residents, and people were still allowed to leave for about a week and a half afterwards. But only residents have been allowed to fly in. And then since then, pretty much all commercial airlines flights have pretty much stopped. They've recently extended the border closure through May 15th, but it'll probably extend further. And then they've actually had a pretty strict, they've had a pretty strict response. So after they shut the border, they really started limiting public transportation. And then for Easter week, so what they call Semana Santa here, Holy Week, they had really strict driving restrictions, so people really weren't allowed on the roads, and those have kind of eased up a little bit, but they've followed through with pretty strict driving restrictions through at least the end of the month. And then they shut down all non-essential businesses, so pretty much only grocery stores and pharmacies are open. And then they actually do have Uber Eats here, so there are still some restaurants that'll do delivery. But otherwise, most things are closed. It's not as strict, and not everyone's really wearing masks. It's pretty relaxed but strict. But then if you also look at, they've had about, I think we've have 600 something cases, but only 6 deaths. So the numbers are pretty low here, which is great. And in terms of research, though, it's been interesting, is the government actually suspended our research permits. So they suspended all research permits in the country. And the reasoning for that is that they don't want people traveling between provinces. They're really trying to limit movement within the country right now. So currently we can't do any of our field work because our permits are suspended, and they're not even processing permits either, from what I've heard. So we're going to try to work on some of our future permits, but the government's just not dealing with any of that right now.
As of today, April 22nd, according to the NCOV 2019 Live, which is where I get my numbers from, Costa Rica has 669 cases, as you said, and only 6 deaths. I don't know what population of the country that is, but just to put that in perspective, as of today, the United States has 830,544 cases and 46,000 deaths. New York State alone has more cases. New York State alone has 258,000 cases. The next highest country in the world other than the United States is Spain, and they only have 200,000 cases. So like one state in our country alone has more cases than any other country in the world, which is crazy. So it sounds like Costa Rica jumped into taking it really seriously, really fast as far as closing borders and limiting traffic.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression I got too. And I think it did really pay off because, they really took a fast response. They really shut everything down. I've been working from home. I've been doing a lot of office work. But I think part of the reason they have low case numbers is they really did take strict measures fairly quickly.
So are y'all all quarantined in your own home? Are you seeing people? What is your day-to-day like? So
the social distancing is still in place in the sense that they really don't want people meeting up. I don't really see people meeting up. So my day-to-day is I live in a neighborhood called El Carmen, which is about a half hour outside of San Jose Center City. And so I'm kind of in more quiet neighborhood, and if you walk up the road from my house, there's these really cool little farms and pastures, And so what I tend to do is I wake up around 5:36 every morning, and I go for a walk because there's really not any people out. And if there are people out, avoiding each other, switching sides of the road. But usually in the morning, I'll see 3 or 4 people maybe. So that's pretty chill. And then usually I'll come back to my apartment. And then I've been doing a lot of remote work. So doing a lot of work, sort of rewriting our protocols. I've making new maps for our site. I've been helping out with our social media, and also we're just trying to put out a presence of, because I work for an organization called Costa Rica Bird Observatories, and my official title is the research coordinator, and so sort of what I'm helping do is we're trying to present with people sort of ideas on things you can do from home and how you can still enjoy nature from home. So then usually, I'll leave in the morning, otherwise I'll pretty much stay home all day. And what's really cool too about Costa Rica is they have these little stores, like little local grocery stores called pulperias, or sometimes they're called sodas, and they'll sell produce. There's actually a guy up the street from me who sells fresh produce, and they sell like basics, so rice, beans, tortillas, the essentials. And so if I need anything, I'll go to one of those stores, usually come back, disinfect. There's not a strict mask order right now in place, but it's kind of recommended. So usually I'll wear like a buff, so like a fabric tube over my face just to be safe. So that's kind of the day-to-day right now. Spending most of my time at home.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about shortages because you have celiac disease and you cannot eat gluten. And I know a lot of people here are having difficulty because there's food shortages, not so much now, but like right the week of like March 17th, it was hard to get any food. And so if someone had a dietary restriction, they can't have dairy. Like I personally drink lactose-free milk and like there was none. So are there any sort of shortages where you're not able to get gluten-free food?
So the toilet paper shortage thing, which isn't gluten-free food, but the toilet paper shortage thing did actually happen in San Jose, where people started buying a bunch of toilet paper, and then that kind of petered out. But otherwise, actually, there really haven't been food shortages, which is amazing. And what's really cool too is Costa Rica, and especially San Jose, is kind of, I would say, one of the more modern Latin American cities, and usually I can find gluten food, but I did I came back from the field March 18th, and I didn't have any groceries, so I was super nervous. I went to the grocery store that week, and the grocery stores are still fully stocked, and I just grabbed a ton of gluten-free food just to be safe. So I'm pretty well stocked on tortillas and gluten-free pasta, and like corn flour, but a lot of that stuff is still available, like these, maybe not the gluten-free pasta, but like a lot of the stuff is still really available at these local markets. I think there was the other time it got a little short on food was during Semana Santa, the Holy Week. Right before that, then the trucks came, sort of dropped off all the food, and then they said, we're not coming back for another week and a half. So because they just kind of shut everything down that week and that weekend. And then after that, though, then everything came back and restocked, and it's sort of all been good since then. So
that's great. Yeah, I know a lot of people here were kind of flipping out because there wasn't gluten-free food. Like people were just grabbing whatever they could and they weren't paying attention, or they were just grabbing the cheapest food. And I know people were trying to say, like, if you can be conscious, leave some of the cheaper food for people who really need it. Or the big thing was, if you can pay attention at the grocery store to things that have like the mark on it that means it's for food stamps, don't take that. Because if someone's on food stamps and they need that stuff and it's all taken, they're kind of out of luck. So I know people are trying to be conscious shoppers, but
yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, it's not as bad here, which is really fortunate. And a lot of the produce is sort of like grown locally too. So
yeah, well, it seems like a lot there is better as far as y'all's response. But I'm also wondering, I don't know if you're familiar with what's happening here right now, but a lot of people are protesting about, like, you can't take away our freedom and let us go back to work and stop the shutdown and this and that, which is like being compared to when your antibiotics kick in and you start to feel better and you're like, I don't need these anymore, and you flush them away. Like, we still need the quarantine. Or, when you jump out of a plane and you're like, the parachute caught me, I don't need it, and you like get rid of it. So the people protesting right now, I want to have compassion for, because I understand they're probably scared, but it also feels like kind of really freaking selfish. So I'm frustrated by that like, if you are
Yeah,
not
for
immunocompromised, you're not elderly or whatever, and you're just like, oh, I want to go back out and get my Wendy's, or I want to get my hair cut again. Like, people are dying. It's really serious. So my question is, are there protests there? Are people respecting the government's response to it?
So I would say, for the most part, I haven't seen protests. So I guess also, to be fair, I am a half hour outside the city. I haven't been into the city center yet, so I don't know if there might be more protests going on there. But as far as I can see in my neighborhood, it's same old, same old. And honestly, people really haven't had a strong response yet. From what I've seen, it could be different. But yeah, people seem to pretty much be respecting the government orders. I still see some people, because the buses are still running, which is interesting, the local city buses. So there's still a bus that goes from my neighborhood into the city. But I see very few people on it. I think most people are staying home. I was talking to my landlord, and I know he was saying, because Costa Rica is so dependent on tourism, and so many people design their livelihood around tourism and the tourism industry, that it's starting to hurt people. But at the same time, I think the government's been so strict about shutting everything down that people aren't. And what they're doing too, which is interesting, so the government is still like following Constitution, is the Costa Rican Constitution, from my understanding. And this is what my bosses told me too. So the way that they're sort of restricting permits, like they'll restrict the vehicles certain days, and then when those restrictions are slightly lifted, then they'll restrict the restaurant permits on certain days. So it's kind of just kept everybody more inside anyways. But yeah, I haven't really seen people protesting, and everyone seems to just sort of be going about life as normal, in the normal sense, as in what is the new normal, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So I know a lot of places here, like Florida beaches, tourism spaces, what you're talking about, have been hit hard. And so they're talking about like opening back up the beaches. And I keep seeing memes of Jaws when they're like, it's 4th of July, you can't close the beach. And then you see the shark like getting his little fork and knife out. Like, no, I know it's going to hurt tourism. But again, people are dying. But I know they're talking right now a lot about opening back up tourism spots, and we just found out yesterday, I guess, that like the governor of California is saying that there shouldn't be mass gatherings like sports events, concerts, etc. until like next year, 2021. And so they were saying Disney may not open back up until next January, which I don't really believe. But honestly, I am so worried about the second wave, like everything going back to normal and then people getting hit even harder, and then being resistant to go back into quarantine. So that second wave is what's like worrying me right now.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very concerned about that too, because especially that's the idea, right? Is the curve flattens and then it should start to decrease, but that doesn't mean you just reopen everything up again.
Yeah. So you said that research was cut off there. So you're still working, but you're not out tracking birds the way that you were. Was there ever a point when you wondered if you should come back to the United States?
Yeah, actually. So I guess just for anybody that doesn't really know what I mean when I'm talking about field work and bird banding, a lot of what I do is I help monitor bird populations by catching birds, trapping them, putting a little ring on their legs for identification, taking various data and measurements, and then letting the birds go. And so when we're out in the field, we're sort of out at these more remote research sites, usually that are sort of in a forest and different habitats, and we're studying the bird populations in these different areas. And with the organization Costa Rica Bird Observatories that I work for, we run, I think, 6 sites right now throughout the country sampling different habitats. And so it was interesting, actually, when all of this hit. We have typically the way our banding program works is there's only 2 full-time staff, me and we are Costa Rica Bird Observatories. And we have other people that work for us, and we get a lot of volunteers from the U.S. that spend 2 to 3 months here. They help us collect this data that we're looking at with the bird populations. And that week in March, I think it was March 14th, 15th, we were out on the Caribbean coast at this site Tortuguero, which is on the beach, and it's a really nice sort of lowland Caribbean forest, so it has more of that tropical rainforest feel. And then it was when everything really started ramping up, and so we would go out into the jungle in the morning, we'd collect our data, and then we'd come back for lunch, and then we'd start reading the news, and we were just seeing that flights started to get canceled. The two interns, so we had two interns working for us, and both of their flights got canceled. And then when they started looking for more flights, companies would be selling flights out of Costa Rica back to the U.S., but then when they would call the company to confirm, the company would say, oh, we can't actually guarantee those flights will leave. What we were actually very fortunate, too, is when coronavirus did hit Costa Rica, we were in the Limon province, and that was the only province, it was the last province to have a corona case. And so we were talking to my boss, and he was telling us to sort of stay put for a few days because it was at that time the safest area in Costa Rica to be, and we were very remote, we were isolated. It's just the three of us, me and the two interns, and so we'd all been spending time together, and we would go into town, but there weren't that many people in town. So again, it was kind of an ideal place to be. But then as things kind of escalated, and then once they did officially announce when they were closing the border, we ended up going back to San Jose, taking a bus, and by that point, too, people were really starting to get freaked out. So when we were on the bus, they had hand sanitizer all over the place. And then that's around the point I was starting to wonder if I should go back to the U.S., just because, it's one of those things where, well, if I don't leave now, I don't know when I'll get back to the U.S., which I guess is still where I'm at now. I don't really know when I'll go back.
Kind of sounds like the Fire Festival. We just watched both Fire Festival documentaries yesterday, where everyone's like kind of stuck on the island. But it kind of sounds like you're better off staying there.
Yes, that's when I was starting to look into going back, I talked to my boss, and I asked him if I was still going to have work here, if he was still going to be able to pay me, and I asked him what he thought I should do, and he told me to stay in Costa Rica because, one, so much lower case numbers, and Costa Rica was actually handling it pretty well at that point, and another, when I talked to my parents about if I should come home, even they actually told me to stay, which is so funny because my parents always want me to come home, but they told me to stay. They're both older. My dad has asthma, and so they just told me stay in Costa Rica. It's probably better, and honestly, I'm very happy I stayed here.
Yeah, it sounds like the right thing to do. I kind of wish I were there, just hanging out with you. We'd have so much fun. I've been loving the photos you've been putting on Facebook of the birds. They're so gorgeous.
Yeah, that's around my neighborhood. Yeah, thanks.
It brings me to my real question of the day, which is, how are the birds? You have told me before that birds are an indicator species. And so you taught me that, like, we can look at birds and learn, like, about climate change, like how the birds are responding is eventually how the humans are going to respond. So I guess the question with this is, obviously birds are not being affected by the disease. It's not, what is that term, zoological. It doesn't transfer to other animals, to our knowledge. There's questions about whether or not a dog had it, but it sounds like no. But the question is, I guess, people are saying that, like, the climate is improving right now because there's not so much pollution out. So are you seeing improvements in bird experience, or are the birds worried because we're worried? Like, how are the birds?
It's a good question, and more people should be asking how are the birds.
I ask myself every morning. How are they doing?
How are the birds? Let's see. So what's interesting right now, so right now is kind of migration. So what's really interesting is a lot of birds have been moving upwards. So we have a lot of North American birds that spend the winter in Costa Rica. And so those guys have all kind of left. And now what we're seeing is a lot of the South American the birds from North America that spend the winter in South America are passing through Costa Rica. So we're seeing a lot of migration. But what's really interesting is a lot of times people are sort of out collecting this data during spring migration and during the summer, which is going to be the breeding season for many birds. And so it's hard to say how the birds are doing because so many people can't do their research. And even there's citizen science, so portals such as eBird, where they'll go out birding and they'll put in their checklist of all the birds they see. And it's a great way to sort of document as these birds are moving up and to sort of see what birds are arriving first and what's going on. But right now, because of so many of the social distancing and so many stay indoors kind of measures in the U.S., where I guess where they are taking those measures, that people can't go out and do their field work, and so many people's field seasons have been canceled that there's actually been some really interesting articles written just kind of saying that it's really a big not just for birds, but for other aspects of field biology and science where people just actually can't collect this data. And so I know for a friend of mine, she does her work, or she was going to go do some field work in the Aleutian Islands up in Alaska, studying some of the seabird colonies up there, and those guys are huge indicators for climate change because they've just been hit so hard with plastic pollution in the oceans and rapid habitat loss. And they canceled her field season at least until June, and so we're actually missing these big windows of data collection because people just can't collect the data.
So we don't know how the birds are?
Yeah, so we actually, we're not sure entirely how the birds are.
Oh my gosh, the poor little guys. They're running free, undocumented. They're just
no one knows what
free birds.
Free birds.
Free birds. Yeah, actually, I watched a documentary that made me think of you. I think it was called Saving Jaws or something. It was about this. It was only an hour long, but it was about like saving our sharks. And they were talking about how like sharks get such a bad rap and they're not that violent and it's okay. And that like if we don't have sharks, the oceans will not be in a good place. But it was making me think of you and the birds.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. Yeah.
The girl who was doing the documentary reminded me of you because she had like long flowing blonde hair and her name was Ocean and she was like swimming with the sharks. She was like, they're so beautiful. I love nature. And I was like, oh, it's Holly. It was so cool.
It's my shark sister.
Yes. Well, actually, so as far as climate change and I guess the birds are concerned, I feel like people are not out driving, so we're not polluting the air with that. There's it seems like our carbon footprint is better. However, I don't think we're recycling in the same way we were. Like my wife's grocery store used to collect plastic. Like you could bring in a bottle and get 5 cents. You know, they were one of those recycling centers, and they've shut that down, which most places have. And so it's like we don't really know what to do with our recycling anymore. So I feel like there's so many weird pros and cons of this where it's like everyone's eating takeout right now, so the plastic consumption is just skyrocketed, but we're not driving, so then it's like weird. I'd be interested to know in a year how the birds are, because I think that's really gonna show like what's actually coming out of this as far as climate change.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to look at that too. And I mean, they have already shown that pollution levels in major cities have dropped. And it'll be really interesting too with like just so much less traffic and less air traffic because when birds are migrating north, there's so many deaths that occur from window collisions and from cats, from cars, from planes. Like the birds just get hit really hard during migration. So it would be really interesting to see just if migration is actually a bit more successful this year because some of these things are reduced. So yeah, it's really interesting, this sort of this whole new lifestyle that we're all adapting to.
I feel like the wildlife in my neighborhood has gotten out of control since people are not outside. Like I live in there's a gate and then you come into the middle. Like my apartment is sort of like shaped like a C, like it wraps around the apartment complex pool. It's fairly gated is what I'm saying. And there was a raccoon just like dipping his little feet in the pool recently. And I was like, he had to get over 2 gates to get in there. Like that is bold. But I was like, no one's out checking the population anymore. Like when I was out for my run, I saw a coyote. I feel like nature has gotten bold in our 1 month absence.
They're like, well, we can take over again.
It's their moment. Honestly, they've earned it. They deserve it. Let's let them have the planet. Well,
that's crazy.
That's really interesting. So was there anything else that you wanted to throw in before we wrap up?
I think I covered most of it.
Any recs you want to give people of something fun to pass the time with right now?
Yeah, I guess one thing I would say, what I've been doing is, of course this is coming from somebody who is an ornithologist and a birder, but I would recommend people start getting into bird watching.
Yes.
And it's pretty easy. So what I've been doing is I put out a plantain or a banana for the birds in my yard, and then I just see what comes. And I'm fortunate too in that like I still am able to go on these walks and social distance. And I do have some really cool birds that come to my bird feeder. But if you can download the Merlin app and the eBird app, both from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And those are a great way to start to get into birding and just, I think it's just a nice relaxing activity to throw some food out, or even just if you have a window, just start looking and trying to figure out what birds you're able to identify. And yeah, I guess so the Merlin app can help you identify birds, and then the eBird app can help you keep track of what birds you're seeing. So I think it's a great way to document the birds that are around your neighborhood. And if you are starting to see more birds coming in, it's a great way to start documenting that.
Yeah, you and I used to go bird watching during our free period in high school, and we were very cool and very popular. So birding is
the more cool things to be doing right now.
It really is. I had so much fun. I really enjoyed like going out and learn, because I hadn't really known much before, but you were like, I've got binoculars, and I was like, let's go. So going off campus and checking out birds was honestly a really fun thing, and I felt like I learned so much because you knew what you were talking about. But it sounds like the apps that you mentioned probably give some education and feedback as well about what you're identifying, if you don't have a Holly to take along with you.
If you do not have an ornithologist on call. Yeah, they're great. The Merlin app, you can search for birds based on color, and you can enter in a vague description. So when you're seeing that bird and it's maybe small and brown, you can enter those in, and it'll pull up a list of species in and then it'll also play vocalization. So I use it all the time when I'm out birding here, and I'll check vocalizations that I'm hearing to see if that's what it is. So it sort of is great because it caters to a whole different levels of birders. You can use it when you're beginning and just starting out versus once you've been doing it for years. It's still a really great app. And then what's really cool too is with eBird, when you enter in your observations, there are scientists like myself. I've done some collaborations and some work with eBird data to sort of some trends with birds in the Caribbean, which is where I did some of my master's research. So there's scientists that use this data that you enter. So it's kind of cool. You get to be participating. You can also help see how the birds are doing.
No, I really think birding is going to have a moment. I think it's ripe for the plucking right now. There's so many people in their home, bored, looking for stuff to do, and by just staying home, you can help the planet right now because you're not out spreading disease or catching disease and then taking up a hospital bed. So you can stay home, and then you can help important research by tracking what you're seeing.
Exactly, yeah.
That's so great. I love it. I love birds, particularly penguins, my favorite of the birds, but I love them all. We grew up with so many birds in my house. We always had parakeets, and we had a parrot and lovebirds and all of them. But birds in the wild are even better, where they belong. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you, everyone, for listening. Appreciate y'all's time. Hope you are doing great and checking out some birds in your neighborhood. It's like Pokemon Go. Think of it as that. You can track the birds as you see them and actually help the planet. So, Holly, I'm going to let you have the last meow. Or if you want to make a very special edition of PodKat, you can do a bird call for us.
Oh. Man, the bird call.
I know you've got a few.
All right.
Wow, that was magical.